Hey everyone, welcome back to the podcast. Today is going to be a slightly different introduction as I found myself really disliking recording these introductions. They feel somewhat of a mask, and what I'm trying to do at the moment is be fully authentic. So my guest today is Dr. Joey Liu. She is a trauma-informed writing and speaking coach. We talk about loads of stuff, but I would say the top three sort of threads throughout the conversation would be decolonization frameworks, what exactly that means. And then we talk a little bit about how those of us from a white Western background feel as though we can't actually feel pride in our heritage or culture or nationality. So we get into the weeds with that. We also talk about neurodivergence with Joey. Actually, I'm honored she's opened up about her autism diagnosis for the first time on a podcast. So we get into that. And I talk about my dyslexia and the neurodivergent sort of ties that tie all that together. And we also talk about sharing stories, how to prepare your story, and what you're willing to share while still being vulnerable. This has been one of my favorite conversations and favorite connections so far in this podcast journey. I really like the types of conversations where we really get into the weeds and challenge assumptions around culture and philosophy and all that kind of stuff. So I really enjoyed this. I hope you do too. Enjoy my conversation with Dr. Joey Liu. You from the US originally?
So I was born in Taiwan, but I grew up in the US. And I have an American mother and then a Taiwanese father.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. Hence moving back out there to
Yeah, so I'm
Taipei, did it say you were in?
I don't live in Taipei. Taipei is the city, the main city that people recognize, and I'm about an hour outside of Taipei. So my town is called Pingzhen.
Pingzhen.
There you go. Yeah,
I spent
Pingzhen.
about a month in Taiwan.
Ah, you did. That's right. You said it was one of your favorite places. Where were you?
Yeah, I was just in Taipei. I traveled around a little bit,
Okay.
but I was doing like a bit of a world tour, and I was volunteering in a hostel. It was kind of so basically I was cleaning rooms in the morning, and
Yeah.
then the evening I was entertaining the guests, like singing and playing guitar.
Ah,
It was quite a
in the hostel.
unique thing, yeah.
That's
Um,
awesome.
I always said it was quite good for my ego, really, because up until that point, I'd been spending a lot of time uh, in hostels in Thailand and places like that, and having Asian women cleaning up after my mess and coming
Mm,
in. And then when I was when I was in Taiwan, literally roles reverse because you get a lot of
hmm
Japanese tourists, and I'm like this like 5'11" guy, like crawling around in these little pods, cleaning up after these middle class Asian ladies.
That's an awesome story. Like, wait, I want to know, how did you get the job? What point did you know that cleaning was involved, and what made you say yes?
Is it there was a website called oh, it's like a volunteering website.
Mm,
So and I was looking to, because I was traveling around, I was basically just getting drunk and hanging out with Westerners, as happens. And then I was like, oh, I want to like experience some culture. I want to do something different.
hmm
And it was between, and then I just found it on a website. It was so random.
mm.
Um, and yeah, did I know there was cleaning involved? Yeah. Like it was fine. I was just trying to push myself out of my comfort zone. It was a very different experience, but it was
Mm.
cool. It was either that or a turtle sanctuary in Borneo. I must admit, I wish I'd done that,
I was
but
gonna say, why did you pick the turtles? I mean, I'm glad you came to Taipei, but turtles sounds awesome.
Why was it fear? Do you know what? Because it was like you basically got a picture tent on the beach, which sounds idyllic now, but when you're like, okay, am I really going to do that? And it was in the middle of nowhere, so I'd had to travel out, and I was kind of like, when you're a bit like, oh, I don't really know what these people are like, I'm not going to be actually inside. So I think it was just a fear thing, but who knows? Maybe I'll get that chance in another lifetime.
Yeah, I hope so. Okay, so let me contextualize. What year was this?
2017.
Ah, okay. And you said a bit of a world tour. How long were you traveling?
11 months.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
I did
that's impressive.
what did I do? Was it 15 countries?
Wow.
I can list them all off, actually. I can usually do them in
Okay.
order real quick. Don't stop me, because you'll be like, why did you go to that place? Right,
No,
so
I won't. I'm just
Germany, Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam, Singapore, Malaysia, Netherlands. Oh no, Belgium, Netherlands. uh, back to um, back to Thailand, Indonesia, Taiwan, Australia, Thailand, New York, New York City, upstate New York, and Mexico, then home.
I love it. Okay, I know this is your show, but I have to ask more questions.
No, let's go ahead.
Did you like how did you fund 11 months of travel, especially when you did like the least efficient way to circumnavigate the globe?
Reckless behavior. No. um, so basically, I basically had a bit of a quarter life crisis, as they say. I had a very well paid job. I had a house. I've spoken about this in the podcast before, so apologies if anyone's heard it, or my family and friends. I had a nice house, nice car, girlfriend, dog, all these things, and I was just miserable. Not miserable, but just like I was just unhappy, and
Mm,
I decided to literally give it all up. So
mm,
I quit the job, which at the time was like everyone was like, it was very well paid. I was 20, like 25, 26 at the time. So for my age, and decided to sell the house. And again, it's hard to get on the property ladder.
yeah.
Um, and yeah, so it was a mixture of savings, selling the house. So I got some funds from that. And I always say, like, I'm so glad I did it, but I've never ever since been in that financial position since.
Again. Yeah. Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
since that day, I've always kind of struggled a little bit.
I get it. Is it
But
worth it?
I
Any
think so.
regrets? Yeah.
Yeah, because you've got to. If I hadn't have done that, like, I wouldn't know, would I?
Mm-hmm.
I'd constantly be thinking, "Oh, I didn't do the traveling thing,"
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and I still think I've got another trip in me, but it'd be
Mm.
very different. Like, I don't drink anymore, and I used to
Mm-hmm.
drink a lot back then, which
Mm-hmm.
is the same reason I don't drink now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
um, so yeah, but I think who knows? Yeah,
Mm.
like who knows? Maybe I'll go on the road with the podcast, and it's a bit of a dream actually to get a van
Yes. Yes. Do
and
it.
yeah, like kit it out, get a studio in the back, and then like the back doors open up, and then like I have like a camera coming in from the outside, so you've got like that
Yeah.
natural light, and yeah, just like traveling around doing face-to-face interviews. That'd be cool, but
Yeah.
we'll see. We'll see.
I've learned just like what 10 minutes worth about you, and we have so much in common already. So this is going to be fun.
Do you know, one of my questions is how can we get others into story mode? And you just did that to me, didn't you?
No, you did this. I don't think I did anything. That
This is the thing
happened
with
effortlessly.
two podcasters.
Mm-hmm.
Like, yeah, because like my propensity is just to talk about myself. So like the podcast is good for me because I can, it's teaching me to listen to others. But I had
Mm-hmm.
another podcaster come on and he just like, it's like sitting in the hairdressers if you have that experience.
Yeah, yeah.
So less about me.
Okay.
Talk me through your work. Talk me through a trauma-informed writing and speaking coach who gets up at 3:50 a.m.
Where should we start? I mean, I started in the classroom with high school students, and that's really where like being trauma informed was a necessity, right? But direct me a little bit more because that was a broad line that you threw me. Where do you want? Do you want to start at the 3:50 a.m. like the workday? Do you want to start with like who I'm working with now?
I would like it's a two-part question.
Okay.
So I want to know what your day looks like. It's a little bit
Okay.
cliched now, the whole morning routine, but just because I happened to message you and you replied at
Yeah.
what is 3:50 a.m., I want to know what you're doing. You've got some sort of Kundalini yoga thing. I'm thinking, yeah, chanting in the early mornings. That's what I'm thinking. And so, like, talk to me about that, and then let's talk about your story. So let's start
Okay.
with your day.
With my morning, all the best like versions of me, all the best chapters in my life have been when I've been an early riser. So when I made the move and I left the classroom and I moved here, I will say like I was sleeping, I was scrolling on my phone, I was watching the YouTube videos because I left my job. I was looking for work, but you know, my kids were going to school, so for the first time, like I had two kids out of the house, and I developed like all of those bad habits that I hadn't had for probably over a decade. And as soon as I knew I wanted to go all in and starting my business, like I made two big choices. One was to start waking up in the morning again, and two was to hire a coach. That's a different story. But what I do when I wake up, I have 3 days a week. I have like a business coaching call that I have to. They're based in Sydney, and they start at 6 a.m. Sydney time, so it's 4 a.m. my time.
Wow.
So I wake up and start the morning with that. Like I try to get up like 15 or so minutes before that, just so I can ground myself and get ready. But then on the other days of the week, I try to stay consistent with waking up at that same time. So I do have a mindfulness practice. It's not all, I lived my life where, especially when I was going through teacher training and right after, like every morning had to be a full Kundalini Kriya and, you know, chanting and the whole nine. And yeah, I think my mindfulness practice is a little bit quieter and more subdued these days. And so I can meditate very quietly. And I also have started practicing Qigong as well. But sometimes my meditation, when weather is good, is just me going outside for a walk at 5 a.m. with all the grannies out here in Taiwan. And I literally get to walk past the rice paddies, or what's left of the rice paddies that I remember from my childhood. And that's a great way for me to start my day too. And I have about 3 hours then before my family wakes up and the whole get the kids ready for school rush starts. So I would not trade those morning hours for anything. That's my time.
Oh, that's awesome. And are you like, what time are you going to bed then if you're getting up so early?
Well, my kids go to bed at, 8 p.m. is like get in bed time, and we want them to be out by 9. And so I'm usually getting in bed with them and falling asleep by 9 if I can, 9:30 at the latest. But that means like off my devices and sort of just powering down.
Oh, so you're getting like a good, what is that, solid 7? Is that 7 hours?
7. Yeah. I'm good with 7. Like I've functioned off of like 6 for most of my adult professional life, but I think 7 now is good. I think I'm now like fully, I feel like postpartum. Like I think people don't prepare you for this, but I think it took like a good 3.5 years post, like I'm done having kids, to feel like back to my normal energy levels. So when I was in that phase, I needed 8+ hours of sleep, and it would wear on me like, oh, I don't have time in the day between kids and needing all this sleep. Like I was used to very high performance, like I can do so much, I can take on so much. So that time period was a rocky relationship with my sleep, but I feel like I'm getting back to the person that I want to be.
Yeah, I've actually gone, like, if 6 months ago I was doing much earlier starts. I think the earliest I was doing was, I did 4:50 for a little while, but then on average it was about 5:30. And then just recently I've kind of like gone the other way, and I'm training in the evenings, going to bed a little bit later, and then I'm getting up at like 6:50. But I do find it's working quite well. You've got to like find your rhythm, haven't you?
Yeah.
It's hard because I do like the early mornings, but my instinct seems to be late nights. I seem to be a bit of a night owl. So it's kind of like, yeah, I think it's just finding what works for you. And what's
so when
really...
you say, sorry to cut you off.
No, go.
So when you say your instincts are telling you you're a night owl, is it like, are you most creative? Is that where your most productive
No, I like to
self
stay
is?
up watching Netflix.
Is that the truth?
A little bit.
Yeah.
A little bit. No, I'm not really. I haven't really. I'm not. I can work into the night, and I can. Yeah, but I try not to, actually, because. Yeah, it just. I'm big on relaxation in the evenings. And the issue is, for me, is like I can work and work
24/7. Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. But then what happens is I get frazzled.
Yeah.
And then I get
like
this,
your brain doesn't turn off.
Exactly. Yeah. And all of a sudden I'll feel like angry, anxious, because obviously a lot of it's on the computer. Now, whether, if I was sat at my table with candlelight and a pen and paper, maybe that would be better. But yeah, so, but I think like optimizing for wake time is like the thing I'm interested in at the moment, because I used to be like obsessing about the time you go to sleep, but I do think the actual time in bed is less of a concern if you're getting up at the same time every day.
Yeah.
Because
if you have your natural rhythm set.
Because as you go to bed, your body's trying to predict what time is he getting up, what time is she getting up. Whereas if you cut it off early, or even like a lie-in can sometimes throw you out, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I wasn't meant to talk about circadian rhythms, but there we go.
Is that another topic you've covered already on your podcast?
No. It's just like anyone who knows me, like I'm obsessed with sleep and circadian rhythms. I'm an optimizer.
I love it too, though. But okay, so circadian rhythms, maybe I haven't researched enough. So you don't buy into that the circadian rhythms are connected to the sun, or you do?
No, 100%. I believe it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, 100%. I believe it. Yeah.
Okay, so for me, like I feel the most energized as long as I'm rising just before or with sunrise. So in winter, it's going to be much harder for me to maintain this 3:50 time. And I have to always go through a process of like giving myself permission to stay asleep a little, like that hour longer, or like just know my body's in hibernation mode during those winter months.
It's difficult, isn't it? Because like obviously, yeah, I'm in the northern hemisphere, you'll be in the southern, right? So are you in the southern?
Right? No, we're northern.
Of course you're northern. Yeah.
The Tropic of Cancer goes through Taiwan.
Yeah, of course. God, I felt like I pride myself on being good at geography. I've just completely... Someone will rip me for this.
No worries.
Please do.
Not I.
Please DM me. But yeah, it's that like that constant like changing of cycles is kind of, it's
Yeah.
beautiful, but it's difficult like as someone who likes to nail a routine.
Mm-hmm.
So like actually just recently I started I was like everything blackout curtains, like I would try to
Mm-hmm.
like because like certainly if I was going to bed earlier and it's light, I'd try and block everything out and kind of what's the word, artificially kind of change my
Force.
circadian
Yeah,
rhythm.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
like it's not daylight.
Mm-hmm.
And then actually just this week, I just totally switched. I'm like, I'm going to open the window. I'm going to take the blinds down. I've just got regular curtains, and I've
Yeah.
been waking up to the sun coming in a little bit earlier, but it's been really nice.
Yeah.
And just trying to go with that flow. I suppose it's the only thing is it's different. It's difficult, isn't it, when we live in a world which is like you've got to go to work and have these 8 hours, and then all of a sudden there's only so many hours of daylight, and
Yeah.
then you're
Yeah.
fighting
Yeah.
against getting up in the dark, like
Oof.
you just say.
I don't miss that at all. I don't miss my commute. I don't miss being on I mean, it's not a 9 to 5 when you're a public school teacher. It's 7 to 4, right?
Hmm.
But I don't miss that. That would be the worst. I didn't mind rising early, but like forcing myself to get out of my house in wintertime when the roads
Hmm.
were still dark and then coming home and it's dark again. I spent all of the daylight hours in the four walls of my classroom.
Wow. Which whereabouts
Mm.
were you at in the States?
California,
Okay.
Southern
I
California,
didn't know it
Anaheim.
went. I didn't realize it went dark uh, in the winter months in California. For some reason, I just imagine it always been sunny.
That's the biggest misperception of California. In fact, if you were to go to California, I don't know about now, it might be warming up, but
Hmm.
probably not. Like you would need to have it's still hoodie weather in California. It
Is this
doesn't summer
Northern
doesn't
California?
no, I was in Southern California, like an
Okay,
hour
right,
outside of LA, in Anaheim.
right.
But it gets chilly in the evening, so even if you have a sunny day in the summer, like you have to throw a jacket on even summer evenings because it's very dry. So it's
Mm.
not like a humid, warm summer night. It's a dry, kind of cool summer night, and we have cold, rainy, dark winters. And I think Hollywood has just like glossed over that, so the rest of the world just doesn't know. We have floods
Wow.
every winter. We have limited hours of sunlight. Like it's not fun.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
crazy. I totally like. I've definitely seen like Northern California,
yeah,
like can be like that, but I had no idea. Interesting. So, all right, let's. But would you talk to me about your story if you'd be willing to share?
yeah, yeah. So I will start first by saying I've told you my dad is Hakka, my mom is American. So when I approach storytelling, literally I am a descendant of oral history as a Hakka woman. Um, and
Can I just?
storytelling is so important. Yes,
Sorry, what is
ask
What is
away.
Hakka? What?
It is a ethnic group originally from China. We're a diasporic people, so even though we are from China originally, a lot of our history is by people getting pushed out of their homelands um, through massacres, genocides,
Mhm.
conflict. My family line eventually ended up in Taiwan, but there's Hakka people all throughout Southeast Asia, a big Hakka community in India, Indonesia.
Mm.
And if you know of any Chinese people in Jamaica or the Caribbean, probably like 99% chance they are also Hakka. So a lot of Hakka people became the Chinese people that came on those boats in the 1800s to replace slave labor to work on the railroads, along with probably some Cantonese and other ethnic groups as well. But in Jamaica, it was one boatload of Hakka people that kind of went and became the entire like Chinese Jamaican population over there. So that's just a fun fact.
Right. Okay. So being is it a
Hakka.
hawker? A hawker? Being a hawker,
Being a Hakka
yeah, right?
person. Yeah,
Is
yeah.
that's determinant on? Is that determinant on China, not Taiwan? If that makes sense. Like, yeah,
Mm,
yeah, yeah, that makes sense, right? So they've.
are you, so you're asking if like we're ethnically Chinese or like or nationality? I'm not sure the question.
Yeah, so no, I've not phrased it very well. So being Hakka, like at first I was thinking, oh, is that an area in China, and
Mm-hmm.
therefore, right, okay, but
Yeah, so that's one thing, one distinction. So, like when you talk about Cantonese people, they're from a
uh-huh,
province called Canton. When you talk about Fukienese people, they're from a province called Fujian,
yes,
right? So, most of the other ethnic groups that are associated with China are characterized by the place, but we are people without a place anymore because of our long history of diaspora. So, Hakka is the name of our language. We're actually called the guest people because we were pushed through so many different regions. And one of our characteristics is that like we're lovers not fighters, we're farmers, we're, you know, we just want, there's also a long history of revolutionaries with us for like social justice causes, but
mm-hmm.
in general if we were getting pushed out we kind of just go with the flow. So our name literally means the guest people, and that's also the name of our language.
Right, okay, right, fascinating. Okay, please continue.
Yeah. So there's a lot of elements to my story, and I feel like we'd talk forever if we were to go, because I love the fact that you're so curious about all these things. But I'll just sum it up in saying, growing up, I always felt like my story wasn't represented in anything I saw around me and didn't fit into any type of box. And I didn't go to high school, I didn't go to any type of school, but I ended up in the field of education because I've been a teacher since a very young age. I felt that it came very naturally to me. And after college, when I didn't really know what, like I was literally at a fork in the roads deciding if I was going to pursue eco architecture or teaching. And I, on a whim, signed up to be a part of an organization that was building schools in Tanzania and volunteering to do AIDS education and prevention there. And so I graduated college and I kind of did my own world tour. So I was traveling the world for 6 months, and two of those months I spent in Tanzania teaching in schools there. And the students that I was teaching said, Miss Joey, you're meant to be a teacher, never stop teaching. And I gave them my word, and I've been making good on it ever since. So I ended up coming back and went through a period of more trauma, housing insecurity, family breakdown, uh, survivor of assault, lots of things.
Mm-hmm.
And stories really saved my life. I'll name two specific stories that saved my life. One, I was in between couch surfing and getting kicked out of, like, overstaying my welcome and being like, hey, yo, like, it's time for you to go. Sometimes having a car to sleep in, sometimes not. Thankfully, I can say I never ended up like having to sleep outside. I always had somewhere to crash, but it was in a very precarious position in my life with regards to my housing. No money in my bank account, no job with pay stubs. I think it was like cleaning houses, nannying, like just doing the odd job. But told my story to an apartment manager, and she took a chance on me and gave me an apartment. She rented me an apartment. And from there, I was like, I'm gonna take advantage of this opportunity. I'm gonna apply to grad school. I'm gonna apply to get my teaching credential. Like I'm gonna make the most of this. And I did, and I ended up in UCLA getting my teaching credential. Got out, couldn't find a job, was just a sub. But put my all into being a substitute teacher. Eventually had my students that I was subbing for, they participated for me in my master's research while I was navigating an entire like sexual assault case and lots of other difficulties in my life and wanting to quit the program in general. Like the community rose up behind me and really helped me get through that. And the principal, like it grabbed the principal's attention, like how dedicated I was to teaching these kids and being a part of the community. And he said, hey, you got to go try out, or not try out, you got to go interview for this job. I didn't even know about it. I hadn't put my job application in, and it was the next day. He said, I'm going to send your resume in to the principal, but this is what you need to do. You need to prep your story for that interview. So I spent
Okay.
all night prepping my story. Um, and it wasn't a sob story. Like I didn't tell him any of these things. I literally told the story of like why I was so passionate about teaching. I told my students stories. I prepped stories, and I got in that job interview, and the job, I would come to find out later, was designed. It was like actually one of those jobs that was made for a returning teacher, but they just had to go through the HR protocol and like fly the job and interview like 10 people. And then they would be like, okay, the person that we wanted to hire back, they're going to get it. And I saw her walking out of the interview, like high-fiving everybody, like super familiar. She knew everybody on the campus. And I was like, okay, I'm like, it's clear, like she got the job. So I might as well just use this opportunity as like a, you know, a trial run. I got in there, I told my stories, and the entire hiring panel changed their mind on the spot. They called me an hour after I walked out of the room and said, you got the job. And
Wow.
that changed the course of my life, because up until that point I was still very financially insecure, housing insecure, going through so much. And it was in the classroom then again that I found that working in a community like near where I grew up, it was a very working class community. There was a lot of violence, there was a lot of gangs, immigrants, people of color. What my students needed was an opportunity to heal, and we found healing through our stories. And at the same time, I was going through many different healing modalities. I was going through EMDR therapy. I was doing a lot of research in decolonizing practices, getting back in touch with my own culture, and then studying Kundalini yoga and Qigong. And so started bringing a lot of those healing modalities with me, as well as deep diving into narrative practices, which is also a part of the decolonizing framework, so that we could heal from within our own stories. And it became so transformational for us. It ended up becoming an entire course that I wrote the curriculum for. It got UC, California State University, and University of California approved for credits. We ended up forming a spoken word team, being invited to perform all over the region, winning some rounds of competition. It ended up becoming very transformational. So I started to see that the power of story, not only for like at the personal level, right, for healing, but then we were impacting our audiences, getting opportunities for me then to go like speak on stages to professionals about the work I was doing, opportunities to write and publish on it. And so it became an entire doorway that I had never anticipated, where I started from.
Wow. That's yeah, that's amazing. And it totally makes sense as to, you know, that path that you've gone down, like that pivotal moment, I guess, when you went for that job and it was the story that was the thing that made you stand out from the lady who was high-fiving with everyone.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, one of the things that you mentioned was is it decolonization?
Yeah. Yeah, decolonizing frameworks.
Okay, what is that?
Okay. How much time do we have?
As much time as you like.
So the idea of colonization is historically,
Mm-hmm.
right? Many places have been colonized by Western powers. And what that has done to people who are not of those cultures, right? Those dominant Western cultures, it's created huge fractures from our identities, right? And when you look at colonized places, the people who were colonized by the Western powers ended up usually being the bottom of the stratus, right?
Mm-hmm.
Social status, economic status. It's the root of issues like racism and sexism and classism and all of these things. Generally, all are tied to this idea of colonization and imperialism. And so a lot of the trauma that we talk about, many of us who've experienced trauma and violence, it's not usually just one-off incidences, it's systemic, right? And there's a lot of trauma there's just no place for trauma if you think about a public school, especially in America. So whoever's familiar with that context, like public schools in America are notorious for being very harmful, especially to marginalized communities, people of color, immigrants, non-English speakers. And so we grow up in these communities where we are subject to a lot of violence, to a lot of hardship, economic strife, where there's higher rates of violence, sexual assault, things of this nature. And we also don't have as many resources. So most of our families aren't familiar with therapy as a modality, or don't have the funds to go hire a therapist to help us heal, right? Or it's just simply frowned upon because we can't trust a therapist. We might put somebody at risk or at danger. So when you talk about like being a trauma-informed teacher in the classroom, when I'm in front of like 200 students a day, and every single one of them has some element of their story that includes trauma, and they have no one that they can trust and nowhere that they can go, right, to get help, and they're just there coping, and then expected to like learn and pass tests and survive high school, right? It became really important for me to be the most healed version of myself, but then to like pass that healing and that learning, and to bring the right balance of vulnerability to the classroom with them. Like I had to stand, like I'm not going to be in front of my students like breaking down, like projecting my issues onto them, right? I had to find that balance of like, I can be vulnerable enough so you can see that I've been on this journey too and that I'm healing. But these are the tools and the frameworks that have healed me, and I'm still a work in process. I'm not perfect. Like to this day, I'm still healing, right? But I can invite you into spaces where we can work out your vulnerability and start to heal those things that most of us have just suppressed for most of our life because we don't have any outlet or any tools to process them.
Thank you. Yeah, that's God, yeah. There's so much there. There's so much there, isn't there? I mean, so talk to me like on a real like practical. So with the term like decolonization. So what range of communities or ethnic groups typically did you work with? Let's say in California, and like, and how do those? What do those groups like? How do they differ? Like, because presumably you have like African Americans and Asian Pacific. Like, talk to me about like how those things like how it differs for each culture and what the
Yeah,
like the different challenges they have. And
that's a great question. So I have to give credit where credit's due. Decolonization as a framework belongs to indigenous communities, like the indigenous um, educators, researchers, healers. They are the ones who really are teaching these frameworks of preserving culture, language, and healthier ways of being in community with yourself, with one another, and with the land. So I want to give credit where credit's due first to the indigenous communities. But it is a framework that actually heals everybody. And I would say it heals even people from Western dominant cultures as well, because even Western dominant cultures are suffering from a lot of the same issues that colonization has produced, right? Like, for example, like just like a disconnect from your own cultures, or like, at least in America, I don't know, you'd have to inform me a little bit if this is the case in UK, but in America, you sort of just have this term for like white people, and they don't know, are my ancestors from Ireland? Like I know my ancestors are from Ireland on my mom's side, but a lot of people don't say
same.
I'm Irish or I'm British or German. Like it's been collapsed into this like construction of whiteness that also removes you from your ancestors, from your stories that were passed down, from that being able to take pride in your culture. Like most people, like you kind of get in trouble if you're like proud of being white right now, right?
Yeah, that's such a good point.
And I know I sort of deviated from your original question,
No,
but I wanted
no,
to
like this is a
point out
conversation, isn't it? Let's like, yeah, let's unpack. Yeah, that's so interesting because I mean, like, rewind 5 minutes, and as you're talking about like colonization, what do you think I'm
Yeah.
thinking?
Uh-oh.
Shame. Like,
Oh,
oh
yeah.
yeah, it's white people.
Yeah.
Like,
Oh,
and we
yeah.
do, and I'm not saying that's, but we have that guilt. Like, certainly and it's like, it's crazy because, again, like, I come from an immigrants as well, like you. Like, my nana was Irish. Um, who knows where I did an ancestry thing, but like, yeah, so my DNA is like all over the place. So for a while, like, when I used to fill out things and it'd say like ethnic group,
Hmm.
and I'd just be like mixed race. I used to do it all the
Ah.
time. And then I stopped doing it because I'm like, oh, is that a bit wanky? Like,
Mm,
am I being a bit cliche? Not
mm,
cliche. Sorry, am I just trying to be like But I'm like, I don't want to just put white because I didn't
Mm.
think, I don't know. I just like,
That doesn't feel like the truth, right?
yeah, like
Like,
there's so
you
much
know, you're
more.
socially constructed as white, but if I put white, I'm not honoring my grandparents' legacy. I'm not
Yeah.
honoring, right? Is that
And
a little bit of that feeling?
yeah, I think so. And also like, I think as well, because, I might come across like I'm trying to be like feel sad for the white people, but because obviously we've had it good, but there is a dark side to that where
There
we
is.
kind of like feel like, oh, so we're not allowed to like, be like you say, be proud of our heritage. Like even heritage is like a word that people don't really use.
Absolutely.
So yeah, so for example, we've got loads of immigrants here, and like just up the road there's a Chinese takeaway, and you know if I were to say, what's your heritage,
Mm.
they would probably actually be fine, but to like the masses, that's like,
Mm.
whoa, they're
Mm.
English. You know what I mean? They're
Mm.
English.
Oh.
Do you know what I mean?
Ah.
Like because they've been born here.
Ah. Yeah.
But I'm
Okay, I
like,
get you.
but
Like the
what's
whole
wrong with
question, like, where are you
saying
from?
like,
Ah.
oh, what's your heritage? Like, I'm fascinated. I suppose because a lot of people,
Yeah.
I suppose if you rewinded like to the 1950s when a lot of the Chinese came over here, there was a lot of racism, I guess.
Yeah.
So that's what we do.
Yes.
We cover it up and then we say, oh no, they're English,
Yes.
they're British,
Yes. So
you know?
now you're getting to the context where colonization is so important. So what you're referring to is social practices of assimilation that
Mm,
both parties, right? Both the European British, right?
yeah.
The fair skinned white constructed British,
Hmm.
and these Chinese immigrants who came over, both sort of agreed to this process of assimilation in those early years, the 50s, 60s, whenever it happened, because that was the band-aid solution to overt racism, right?
Yeah.
That allowed you guys to just be neighbors with each other, go to each other's businesses, be cordial. But what happened is it damaged both sides because now we're not talking about our actual stories, identities. We're not honoring
Mm,
our legacies, our truth. And we're putting a band aid over a problem that is a problem. Like colonization is a problem for everybody. It's the root of why we
mm,
have climate crisis and, classism and extreme poverty because globalization in general is just not sustainable, and it was started by those European imperialists who decided to take more than what they needed, and including humans as labor. So I'll leave that there, but I want to go back to one. I want to thank you first because you asked the question about decolonization, and that's why I answered so freely. um, and you put yourself in a very vulnerable spot. And I want to acknowledge that, like, as a woman of color, I've been careful to do two things. One is that I'm not going to diminish myself to make you feel more comfortable, but as a teacher and a human and just as just a peer, right? I see your vulnerability and I also see your bravery, and I want to commend you for that you asked a question that you could have easily glossed over, and you allowed it to go to a place where hopefully anybody that feels the way that you felt, that you named, like maybe they have a little bit more invitation, because what is universal is shame. Every
mm,
person, no matter where you're from, is shame, has experienced shame and
mm,
wants to avoid it because it feels sometimes life and death. It feels so bad, and in our nervous system it
mhm,
feels like oftentimes our brain can't figure out when we feel shame and we feel that trigger, our like reptilian brain is telling us like you're in danger, and almost can't sort out, like, is there a predator that's going to
mhm.
get me, or is it just the internet citizens that are going to jump on me?
Well, thank you for that. I appreciate it. Off air, we talked about, I say off air, through Instagram, we spoke about like authenticity and oversharing and stuff, and kind of like, earlier on in the conversation when I couldn't really get my words out and I was trying to ask you about decolonization, I'm like thinking, you're stupid, you're stupid. Like, don't, it's really hard
Mm.
sometimes. And
Mm.
because I'm like, I don't know what she means. I don't
Mm.
know. And I'm going, but so I've had to, like, because I'm dyslexic, and I only found this out like when I was 21, after I'd gone through school, never reading a book, and no one knew. I totally masked my
Mm.
way because I just thought I was
Mm.
thick.
Mm.
I like thick, but not. Couldn't understand it, so I masked.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm.
this is something I've been becoming more aware of, is like my masking abilities.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So maybe 10 episodes ago, when you said decolonization, I'd have gone, yeah, chin stroking, and
Yeah, yeah.
pretended that I understood.
Uh,
And there's something that I've tried to become more aware of, where I'm like, what's that mean? I don't know what
yeah.
that means. Tell me what that means. Speak to me like a 5-year-old, because I think, yeah. So, yeah, so I'm going to apologize for earlier on when I couldn't get my words out, but I'm going to leave it in.
I didn't, just as a mirror, I didn't experience you not getting your words out. There was never, I'm
Really?
like, yeah. So
That's interesting.
isn't that funny that we have that internal experience where I'm like, oh, I'm dropping the ball. I'm fumbling right now. What is somebody outside of
Mm-hmm.
me going to think? And like, I didn't perceive that at all. And I want to acknowledge as well, I've done a few of these podcast interviews, specifically since I started my business. So I've asked the question, like, what is this all about? This is the first one where I've even mentioned decolonization, and that has to do with the groundwork that you laid at the beginning of the conversation. Like, I always try to like feel out intuitively who I'm talking to, and is
Mm-hmm.
this even a conversation that's worth having? Like, can we
Yeah.
dig into this, or is this
Yeah.
gonna, and something, whether it was because we were talking about you traveling the world, or that you're so curious, you lead with curiosity, you made it safe enough to go there. So I'm really grateful to you for that conversation. It's one of the things that, like, I know it's maybe not the smartest business move to lead with that type of messaging. It can alienate people, like you sort of described in that,
Mm.
in your experience, like people who don't know. And it's something that I'm intentional about, because I also want to be clear that who I serve, right? And I want to be clear that for those who need it, even if you don't know what it is yet, I represent a safe space for those of us who haven't fit in, right? Who have tried for all of our life to fit into white spaces that weren't designed for us. And I can say white spaces and talk about race, but you brought up dyslexia, so let's go there. I'm also late diagnosed autistic, so I understand the
Well,
masking experience as
yeah.
well. And so we can go there, like you and I, like, let's drop race now and let's just go, like,
Mm.
how much of our life have we forced ourselves to fit into neurotypical spaces that weren't designed for us? And
Mm-hmm.
how harmful has that been for us? Like, where we've either just had to numb ourselves out, or live with the shame of, ooh, I asked too many questions. Ooh, I info dumped too much. I've pushed people away. So I just, again, thank you for naming those experiences, because without sharing these stories, so many more people continue to live their life thinking they're the only one, and don't even
Mm.
have a starting point to imagine healing for themselves, to imagine belonging in spaces that feel more like home, that feel more like your people, that we just get each other.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so that's the power of storytelling, and inviting people into conversations where, if you're not like me, you're going to learn from me, and if you are like me, you now know you're not the only one that feels that way or has experienced that.
Yeah, the neurodivergence thing is an interesting one. And the first time I heard the term was on the second podcast I ever did with Dr. Rachel Taylor, and she talked to me about neurodivergence and dyslexia,
Mm-hmm.
dyspraxia, autism,
Mm-hmm.
um, Asperger's. But apparently, Asperger's is now they've put them,
They've
that and
collapsed it
autism
into the
together.
autism
Yeah.
spectrum. Yeah.
And obviously, if you're listening to this and you're kind of like, what is this, like, new age? Look at my labels, or
Yeah,
because there will be some people thinking that,
for
and like,
sure.
but it's
It's
like,
safer for them. It's safer
yeah,
to, like, go from that place of
Yeah, just like avoidance, kind of
Yeah.
like, oh yeah, like just get on with things. But
Yeah.
and sometimes I've mentioned it to some people, and they're like, well, is the label helpful? And I know what they're saying, but for me, absolutely,
Mm,
because and actually, so I got diagnosed with dyslexia like I don't know, like 15 years ago or something.
mm,
But it's only until recently I started understanding neurodivergence, and then I'm like, oh, right, that's why. That's why I'm a bit weird, basically. I just think differently to other people. Or
mm-hmm,
sorry, I think differently to the majority of people.
mm.
Neurotypicals, right?
It may not even be the majority, we're finding out.
Yeah,
It may
yeah,
be pretty close to 50-50, which is why people are like, oh, it's a trend. Now everyone's coming out as some type of neurodivergent.
yeah,
But remember what I
yeah.
told about spaces that are
Uh-huh.
designed? When we say neurotypical, we're just talking about the neurotype that fits the way society was constructed, because the people in power that decided these are going to be our social norms
Mm-hmm,
at the time of colonization and hegemony
mm-hmm.
happen to be European neurotypical males. But that actually doesn't represent the true number. And we're so far off from like finding out what that is, because there's many reasons why people don't get diagnosed. And so I think we're a few generations off from getting more clear numbers on really what the population is in terms of neurotype.
Mm. Let me just hover over. So you said something really interesting, that
Mm.
the early colonizers, the Western colonizers, were neurotypical. Do we know that as a fact, or is that just like a hypothesis?
Um,
Or what's the evidence for that?
let's work with it as a
Yeah.
hypothesis.
Uh-huh.
Then let's examine some cases in history of people who we know were probably on the autism spectrum or
Mm-hmm.
neurodivergent. People like Einstein, Tesla, some of them like brilliant minds and
Mm-hmm.
creators that have made breakthroughs for society. They were memorialized in history for their accomplishments. But if you read through their journals and examine their day-to-day life, they were ostracized from society. So we have to assume that if society was set up in a way where we can look back in history and say the people with autism traits were always ostracized by society, then like as an autistic person, I wouldn't choose to set society up in the way that it harms me, right? So I have to assume that the people who set
Mm.
society up this way and have for generations ostracized people of my neurotype, well, it's because you're probably neurotypical. You either you're super high masking and don't have enough compassion to make a better world for all of us, or you're just neurotypical and haven't done the work to like think about including us
Mm.
in how you're setting up your systems. Can we work off of that theory?
Yeah, yeah. I think I suppose the only thing I would say is, as a neurodivergent person, man, whatever,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
being, part of that is like I don't even know the best way to work.
Mm.
Like I don't know myself. So
Mm.
if you give me the reins, if you give me the great example for me is like if I'm running my own business, which I've
Mm.
done plenty of times and to mixed success, I will put everything into like spreadsheets.
Same.
Yeah.
I love a spreadsheet.
So like everything's like everything's got to be you and I'm very analytical and put things into boxes. So if someone will say to me, without all of the context that we have today, and someone said, right, Jason, you're going to do the education for the world or for the United Kingdom, wherever it is we are,
Mm.
I could see an example where I go, right, maths, English, like, and breaking it all up. So I suppose that's the only thing I would say is maybe, yeah, maybe I wouldn't be the right person to say, actually, what you need to do is we need lots of play, we need lots of creativity. I'm a musician, so, maybe I would go down that route or whatever. But yeah, it's an interesting thought experiment to think about how these things.
Can I ask a question in that
Please do.
scenario? Why would you be planning out the system and structures of the world as one singular person?
Because I'm a closet tyrant. No. I don't know. I don't know. You.
Well, I want to, if you're feeling any type of shame or embarrassment from that question, let me like walk that back a bit. Your answer is socially constructed. It's socially constructed by you being a white British man brought up historically in that system. Why I ask that question is, if you were to belong to a different social construction, like indigenous cultures, my Hakka culture, for example, we're a collective people. That would not be the first thought in our mind.
Yeah. Got it. Right.
We're a group of people, so I would never feel the pressure to design an entire society by myself with the way that I, with my hyperfixations and interests, because there's eldership, there's collaboration. And I will say too, as part of what I was talking about earlier, why decolonization is such a powerful framework for healing, is that many of the indigenous and collective cultures that were damaged by colonization, but when we go back to them in their integrity, they are safer. There are spaces where neurodivergent and neurotypical people can thrive. Right? I think about as a Hakka person, we're quite an insular community. So, meaning like until my generation, Hakka people married and Hakka people and stayed Hakka as a way of self-preservation. And so we have a lot of traditional practices that we've, like me being raised in the 90s, I still practiced a way of Hakka culture that was similar to my ancestors. And it's healthier for me. I am the healthiest version of my little autistic self living here in Taiwan, where my aunties across the street, my grandparents are around the corner. Everyone knows everyone here. Like I mentioned, my mornings walking around the rice paddies, everything is on, like breakfast is at 6 a.m. Dinner is at 6 p.m. You take a nap in the afternoon. Everything is so regular and structured since the beginning of time until now. That is like a massage for my autistic brain. There's so much less that I have to figure out here. And honestly, if I didn't move here, I probably wouldn't have the bandwidth to try launching my own online business. Like if I was still in the grind of commuting and keeping up with society in California, I don't think that I would have the energy to do the creative work and the service work that I'm doing now. So that, all that to say that there are societies, that Western colonial society is not the only one. But colonization makes all of us think that until we start doing our decolonizing work. And many of the societies were just way better for all of us. Many of the other societies.
Yeah, so interesting, because I'm like, you're talking there, and then I'm like, meanwhile, I'm going through this fucking infinity mirror of like, what is real? What is culture? Like, hang on a minute, how do I think? Like, where's my culture? Like, am I allowed to, like, can I do decolonizing work? Like, this is all my thoughts. And I'm like, yeah, which one do I belong to?
Where do you belong to? I think you can answer that question. I'll hold space for you. Where do you belong?
I don't know, and I feel like I've maybe gone like way abstract now, and I'm like, yeah, so let me rewind. So it's when you said about when I was saying about how I would set up society if I was like given the, someone like, oh, we need to figure this out. And then you sort of like called me out and like, hang on a minute, why are you doing it on your own? And then I was like, I don't know. Like, I just thought that was the plan. So I was kind of like, okay, so yeah, so how would it work? Like, and then I started thinking about like colonization, and then trying to roll it back to like, I don't know, like where do I come from? Because I try and like imagine myself in like this like Celtic kind of setup somewhere, but I'm like, but I don't know even if that's true. And this is why it's so interesting to look at your heritage. And I mean, like, I could have an Irish passport, but I've never been to Ireland. Is literally, where am I at? Over there.
Hop and a skip. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just
wow.
And I've just never got round to it. And
I haven't been to Ireland either. We should go together.
Yeah.
Let's connect with our ancestors there together one day.
Let's do it. Let's do what do they call it? What's it called? A pilgrimage.
A vlog. Oh, I was like, a vlog. Let's vlog our journey.
Yeah. Well, and
back to the homelands.
Another like minor regret that I have is like, there are many. No. When I did my world tour, one of the last places I was going to go when I was in Mexico, I was like, right, I'm going to go to Ireland, visit the place my nana was from, and then come back home. I just didn't do it. I think it was something as simple as the flight price to Manchester versus Dublin or where, was so much more expensive. And I think I just went, oh, sorry. Considering it was so, but yeah, place got a little village called Kilconnell, which is in I've forgotten the county now.
But that's powerful that you know the town name. That's something.
Yeah, it's cool. Like, so most of my family have been, like, my mum's been, my two cousins who are like my best friends, they've been, and apparently. So like my nana's like, she passed away like more than 10 years ago now. But like apparently when you go there, like this little village, it's like the same people. They still remember like my nana.
Yes.
And I think she moved when she was like a little child. And maybe that's changed now because it's quite some time since. But yeah, it's interesting, and I think this conversation is like so beautiful to me because you've like allowed, like you say, you've held that space, and we've gone like different places. We're not just talking about like morning routines and circadian rhythm, and I love it. Like I love getting into the weeds with this kind of like creative thinking and challenging like constructs within our minds and culture and. Yeah, so thank you for that. May I just use the bathroom?
Yes, you gotta take care of what you have to do.
Yeah,
I'll be here.
I'll be 2 seconds. It's
okay,
see, because I was 30 minutes early, like it's thrown my whole thing out.
I'll be here.
1 second.
Actually, I'll run too. Why not? I put a pin in 3 things I'd love to be able to pick up and make 3 points if I can.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you go for it.
Number 1, you were referring to like you love having these type of conversations where you sort of really dive deep. And in my work, whether it's in the classroom or later workshop talks and keynotes that I did, we call these courageous conversations. So I want to acknowledge the courage it took for you to go on this journey with me. And I also, because there's a lot of discomfort, right? And so I just want to like acknowledge the discomfort, even for the listeners. One thing is that a lot of healing is done through discomfort because it's easier sometimes to just like sweep things under the rug. We don't feel the discomfort, but then later, like we know suppressed emotions, they're going to show up other places, whether that's physical illness or blow ups and meltdowns, whatever. So if we can just do like the little work in the range of discomfort, we can actually become much more whole, healed, and healthy people, right? So number one, thanks for the courage to go through this with me. Two, I want to acknowledge that like in the coaching that I do, this isn't like, we don't just sit down and be like, okay, now we're going to do decolonization. Like, actually, I never mention it. But here's a little like sneak peek. Like, one of the prompts I ask my clients as they're preparing, so many people come to me and say, I don't have a story. And one of the prompts I give them in the first week of coaching is to examine identity. And my goal isn't that they would deep dive into their race. And I don't even bring it up them myself, but a lot of times people end up asking the questions like, what do I know about my identity and what I don't? And the things that they don't know then becomes an exploration that on the other side of it, they start to feel a lot more clear about who they are, a lot more pride in the story. Like, if you come to me and you said you don't have a story, chances are you haven't been given the space and the tools to sit with it and go through this exploration, like you called it, right? And because you haven't, then you've minimized your identity. Or maybe because of some of these social constructions, like you named, like if you are of European descent, you're like, well, I can't really talk about my race because that's not special. That's almost shameful to talk about it. So what, like, we all end up flattening ourselves to these like socially accepted stories. Like, well, I work out, that's my story. Or, I'm into drinking coffee, that's my story. Because it's hard to explore things that we haven't been given permission or guidance to explore. Yeah. And then the third thing I'll say is that I always tell my students and clients when discomfort comes up, one thing about our story to acknowledge is that there's aspects of our story we don't choose. And that's another human equalizer. None of us choose what race we are or parents, where we were born, right? If we've gone through traumatic experiences, that's not by our choice. So there's so many parts of our story that are not by choice, and there's so many parts of our story that are. And we do have power to choose many aspects of the story that we want to live now and that we want to tell in our future. And by doing your story work, you get to reframe and make peace with those aspects of your story that you didn't choose, that are harder to tell, and then lean into the power that you have to make the story from here on in your healing chapter and your healed chapter, to write that story the way that you want to tell it.
Yeah. It's interesting. Yeah. You've totally got me in, you've literally got me in story mode or like, oh, it's more like therapy mode. It's weird. Like, I've got this feeling in my nervous system where like I'm starting to relax.
Good.
And it's lovely, but also I'm like, what's the next question? Like, because
maybe I talked a little bit too much. 3 points was too many to stack on top of each other.
No, it's cool. This is something I'm really trying to balance, and you might be familiar with this. Like, being present with the conversation and listening whilst not trying to queue up your next question, but also allowing like the conversation to be professional, so it doesn't meander off too much. It is such a skill. Whereas like, so then I was just like, because I quite like just listening to you, and then and I'm like, oh shit, yeah, I'm the host. What was I? Yeah.
Can I speak to that?
Yeah, let's go.
The pressure you're feeling is also Western socialization. So in indigenous cultures and narrative cultures, when we are having conversation, we have much more socially accepted pause time. So we can listen to a story that meanders, and then we can pause and sit with it. And there's no pressure to have the next question teed up. It's industrialization that said, hey, we're living life on the conveyor belt and you better be ready. You better be primed to push that button or to do your job. Like, efficiency is number one because that's what makes the CEO more money. And so we've actually lost the art of deep listening, calming conversations, and storytelling, where in our ancient cultures, yours included, right? Like our Irish cultures, our European cultures, there was somebody in the community whose job was to tell the stories as a way of delivering the most important messages in the community, preserving the oral histories, right? And communicating the news, right? Or whatever needed to be communicated. Their job was so important that they dedicated their entire life to just telling stories and keeping the audience's attention. So it's a lost art. I'll say all that to say it's a lost art. And if you need time to come out of listening and into asking a question, that's normal. Congratulations. You're welcome to experience that.
Yeah, I guess it's like another mask, isn't it? Like that constantly needing to keep the ball rolling. And I think for me, see, it did it then. I paused and I'm going,
love it.
Okay, and then, but my brain just goes blank because I'm aware of the pause. I had a podcast the other week, actually, and it was this lady's first podcast she'd been on. And every time I paused, she did this little thing where she sort of went, like, and obviously I'm not judging her, but she was kind of like, oh, what's she going to say? And it made me nervous, though, because I'm like,
imagine.
Yeah. And it was sort of like, I was thinking about it this morning, and it made me think about, like, so I used to be terrified of public speaking. And was one time when I was at Bandcamp, this one time when I was at college, I was doing like a stand-up presentation, and I locked eyes with like one of my friends who was in the classroom, and he just went, "Why'd you keep looking at me?" And I was like, oh. And I just like, my whole world just fell down, and like I didn't know what, and I've spoken to him about this since, and he was like really apologetic. I was like, you traumatized me for public speaking. Memory. Yeah. Like, because is it when you're not used to it, you don't know where to look, do you? You kind of like, and but yeah, sorry. Like, and again, I've took it way off track there. There's so many different threads that I sort of want to go down.
Let me before we pick up another thread, let me just speak to that, and maybe this will be something that helps you. Or do you feel good about that right now? Yeah, you want a tip?
Yeah, I know that. I like it.
So as a person who masks and mirrors, as a neurodivergent person, I learned a lot of my public speaking skills from like studying speakers that I loved the most, and I loved listening to. My favorite speakers have always been Black or Indigenous women, and I watched their mannerisms. And one of the things that would like arrest me, my whole body would have a visceral experience if I was listening to them talk, is when they would tell their story or give the talk, and then they would stop and just be silent, but be in control. The pause was as much a part of the design of the story and the design of the experience they were weaving for the audience.
I suppose for me, what that brings up is like, and again, because I've got like a music background.
I was going to ask you if you play music.
Yeah. It's not so much these days. That's a different story. But most of my life I've been a musician, and I remember learning from, it was a guy called Tom Hingley, and of a band that were famous in the late 80s, early 90s in Manchester called the Inspiral Carpets, and he did like a session with us, and he was talking about like that power of dynamics,
yes,
and leaving dead space,
yes,
being quiet, and then because obviously people then invest in you more than if you're shouting.
And what happens when we're nervous on stage is like physiologically we're going to speed up, right? So physiologically you're going to talk faster, you're going to move faster. A lot of people pace on stage just as an outlet to get their nerves out, right? But if you can, like, next time that you experience a pause when you're talking and you have that filter in your brain saying like, hurry up, they're waiting on me. If you can then in that moment reframe, like, I'm playing music, I'm the storyteller. This pause is part of my story. Even if your brain doesn't have words, respect the pause. If you're channeling divine inspiration, if you're channeling your knowledge, your intuition, your stories, maybe there's a pause in between some of them. Reframe that and see what happens to your nervous system. You might relax.
See, do you know what comes up? It's like, yeah, that's okay for everyone else, but I've got processing speeds issues because I'm dyslexic. That's why I'm pausing. Like that's the story I'm telling myself.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like that, like freeze moment where, so I think maybe it's like, maybe I've got to get comfortable with, like, what do they call it? Exposure therapy, like expose myself to the pauses more.
I mean, exposure therapy can be a little bit harsh, right? I'm not sure if I'm an advocate for that. And at the same time, like when I was teaching this course with high school students, or even I would do workshops with adults as well. You have, start off in a safe space. So you're in a community where everyone's working on the same thing. We're supportive of one another. We've already done our work to know that this is a judgment-free zone. And so if that's what you mean by exposure therapy, for sure. I don't know if I would recommend like exposure therapy, like get on the biggest stage in front of a cold audience who maybe has some like stake in your material livelihood.
I was thinking more along the lines of just doing longer pauses.
Yes. I mean, if you're comfortable on the podcast, I would say for sure. But I think it's interesting that you named that the narrative that runs in your head is that this pause is specifically not okay because of my diagnosis. And my diagnosis has been socially constructed to be a disability or a liability to me. And therefore, I'm not going to give myself permission to pause specifically because I'm dyslexic. What happens if we flip that and say my dyslexia or the way my brain is wired allows me to pause in a way that's good for me and my audience and allows me to channel my message better? What if this is my superpower?
Yeah, that's so good. And I do believe it is. I do believe it.
You do. You have to, because it helps. It makes you more creative, right?
Like, because the way I'll see it is like, for example, if you take non-neurotypical, sorry, God, I'm going all non and
let's do it.
We know what you're saying. Neurotypical,
yeah.
And me, and we're digesting the same problem. Here's how I think it works usually. Let's say this is me. Is there anyone listening? I've got my left hand up, and then on the right side is the neurotypical person. They're given a problem to figure out. I feel like if like in coming to the solution, if like raising it up is getting closer to the solution, now I'm going to raise my hands up. So I'm like, neurotypicals are like this. I'm like, my right hand's still going up, and the left hand is me. I'm still down here. I'm like, what the fuck? 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 Now this might be a day or an hour. This time gap, but then I'll find is I'll just go, and I'll just jump ahead, and I'll like totally come to like, because I've looked at it a totally different way, and I'll understand it better than anyone.
I get you.
Yeah.
And they might be on a slow, steady pace to do the same old, but you might just have came up with the new, better way to do something, right? And I want to say, like, back to, if anyone's feeling a type of way about, now you're shitting all over neurotypicals and like positioning them to be like the inferior.
Yeah.
Going back to that society, that decolonized society, everyone has a place and a role, and everyone is valuable because we're different.
Yeah, 100%. Yes, right? and yeah, that was like a very broad bucket, like sample of my experience with certain problems.
Yeah. It was, for sure.
But again, like that ability to like think faster and stuff, again, is, probably the person who's going to think fastest is probably probably a good soldier. As well, which is interesting.
Or a factory
Yeah.
worker. I mean, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Oh, are you saying soldier as in like think like quick as
Like
in
no,
like
like
make
a colonizer. So like we were
yeah
saying before about
yeah yeah
like,
yeah
so a non, so if a non, sorry, if a neurotypical
neurotypical
is just faster off the ball in terms
I
of
just
coming up with
fall
a solution, they're probably better in the battlefield and a better
mm.
colonizer.
Oh, okay, I'm following you. Yeah,
Yeah.
so I'm saying okay, because they don't need to sit and wait and like gather data like we do. Like we have to like almost like absorb every piece of data that could
Yeah.
possibly inform the decision that we're going to make. It could
Yeah.
be crippling. Like when you're in
Yeah.
research mode, you have to
Yeah.
like consume it all, and then you like push that one button that then spits out the answer in the algorithm of our brain, right? But they
Yeah.
just go, I see like 1, 2, 3 pieces of data, and I'm going to make a decision based off of that, and just go for it.
Yeah, precisely. And but then yeah, but then now like I'm also thinking, yeah, you're talking shit, Jason. That's a lie. You can think fast because I can think fast as well. I don't know. It's weird. It's so strange to try and
Well,
like.
are you thinking fast in contexts that you've done before, like similar types
Yeah,
of
good
problems that
idea.
you've solved before?
Yes. That's it. That's it,
Mm,
isn't it? Yeah. If I,
mm.
because yeah, I can think fast in something that I've already digested. But if it's something brand new,
Or where there's a lot of parallels, right? Where it's maybe
yeah,
something new, but there's enough parallels that can be drawn between a problem that you've solved already. And you're like, I
yeah,
can just apply a
and
lot of the
maybe like
same.
an unconscious parallel that I don't even
Mm-hmm.
realize that I've got the
Exact.
context around.
Well, neurodivergence, like one of our superpowers is pattern recognition. So you don't even have to bring it into the conscious,
Mm,
like comprehension level. You're just seeing patterns and functioning off of it.
yeah. So let's talk about let's like talk about that a little bit more. Like, so when did you get diagnosed with as autistic?
Mm,
How has that sort of like shaped your experience?
mm. Yes, that's a, and thank you for holding this space for me because you've made me comfortable enough to tell the story. This is the first time I'll be telling this story publicly.
Wow.
And I've always told myself that I was going to wait until I got a second level of a diagnosis that like, so I've like gone to an MD and gotten the first screening.
Hmm.
And I've always told myself I would wait to tell the story until I got like paid the additional $1,000 to get like the certificate of whatever,
Okay.
whatever. And I'll circle back around and tell you why that's important. But I'm
Hmm.
comfortable enough telling it now for a few reasons. But one of them is that you've been such a great conversation partner to dive into these courageous conversations with. So I really want to thank the person who opened the door to this entire revelation for me. And it happened when I was doing my PhD research, and I was researching with a school who happened to be, they were located in LA, and they were run by, it is run by a husband and wife partner. And she's indigenous, and he is a white American, but who happens to be on the autism spectrum. And as I was researching with them, he was teaching in his classes, and one of the classes, because they've created this like radical community grown school that defies all like social conventions of dominant culture. It was awesome. And one of the classes that they teach is around neurodivergence and different neurotypes. And he was so comfortable talking about himself as an autistic person. And I was like, how can you feel so comfortable talking about being autistic? And first of all, how can you be autistic? Like, you look so cool,
Mm.
you speak so well, you function as an entire founder of a school, right? You're married to a beautiful woman who's super cool too. Like all of the social constructions that I had been taught to believe about autism were like firing off, like, you can't be autistic. And if you are, like, why are you so comfortable talking about it? And one of the reasons why I was having such a deep experience of this is because I have fought my entire life the diagnosis of autism. Like I have been like, if I just work harder, right? Like I never believed it about myself. I
Mm.
never believed it about myself. And I was like, I can't be autistic because I can make friends. I can't be autistic because I can have romantic relationships. I can't be autistic because I don't struggle as much as other people on the autism spectrum who are nonverbal or have learning, other challenges with learning. Like I have 3 degrees. Like I can't possibly be autistic.
Just you might have covered this, so I apologize. When did you first come aware that maybe you thought differently? Was that
It was pointed out to me when I was an undergraduate in college by somebody who was an autism behavior therapist, and she noticed that I stim. So, like in
what's that?
conversation, stimming is like when you do a repetitive movement. So I think at the time, I've kind of trained myself out of it, but like I would just kind of rub my ear
Oh,
constantly while I was focusing on listening. Or when I get nervous, like oftentimes I'll get like autism hands where I'll be like, my hands will become little balls or paws or like have to apply a lot of pressure. So she was picking up on some of these social cues that until it got pointed out to me, where then I would hyper correct it, I wasn't aware of. So I was sort of giving it away. I had these tells and she pointed out to me, I was just like, I was hurt. I was
yeah.
hurt. At the time, I'm like living a college life where I'm partying. I was probably like skating off of some pretty privilege in college and just like using that to mask and not have to really examine like all the other things that made me weird.
Sorry, I'm not laughing at you. It's just because it tracks with my experience.
Mm-hmm,
Yeah, being
mm-hmm.
charming and like
Like you
above
don't you
average looks.
yeah, it's just like you can't possibly be autistic because people ask you out, So
Hmm.
and I wanted to believe that because being autistic looked terrible, right? Like everything that we were raised to believe about being autistic was like that is a banishment in society to the outskirts of any, like you just can't possibly be autistic and successful. So I was hurt in that first experience, and then I'll fast forward to another moment where I was doing EMDR therapy, which was provided to me as a victim of crime. So in my 20s, I went through experience of sexual assault and then ended up receiving, thankfully, the silver lining in that was that I received top tier therapy as a victim of crime and could not process the assault itself in my therapy because everything that started coming up first was related to both childhood trauma and neurodivergence. And my EMDR therapist, like after over a year, and like EMDR, I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it
That's my
really
next
like
question. What is the
eye movement
EMDR?
rapid desensitization. So if you've ever felt burned out from doing like cognitive behavior or just talk therapy, EMDR
Uh-huh.
is a great option to explore. What would happen is that, and this is also in part of my trauma informed framework, like I could not tell the story of my assault to a therapist, even in a safe space. I could not verbalize it because it was not safe. Like what I would experience in my nervous system
Hmm.
was so crippling and debilitating that I could not talk about it. And so EMDR therapy is a mode of therapy where I would use sensors in my hand. There's also, you can wear headphones and they have sounds, but it stimulates left to right and it mimics putting your brain into REM sleep where it does the work of reprocessing for you. And so
Mm.
while you get into that deep state, um, your therapist will give you different targets, not questions. You're not expected to produce language, but different targets to focus on, and then allow the brain to do whatever it needs to do to sort of like, because what happens in trauma is that we have information that is scattered all over my brain, all over your brain and
Hmm.
your nervous system. And that's why you get triggered by seemingly unrelated things because you have a piece of trauma information lodged over here in your brain that you can't even go find and process and organize it into the appropriate drawer of your brain because it's too scary to go even retrieve it. So what happens in EMDR therapy is that your brain will one by one go and collect those pieces of trauma information from the various synapses in your brain, connection points in your brain, and then you do the work. At that point, then whether through being prompted to talk or journal or just reflect on it, of organizing it and containing it in a place that feels safer. So as I was going through this like 2-year process of EMDR therapy with her, she really started to say, "Hey, Joey, I think you need to like look into autism as being one of the things that's coming up for you as as what's coloring your experience with processing trauma. And I like took her resources and I declined. I was like, no, I'm going to work harder on being normal. And the thing I said to her, this is when I'm already a high school teacher, and I was like, I can't possibly be autistic because I serve autistic students and I don't struggle with what they struggle with, right? So I was like so high masked, and also maybe a little bit similar to like what you named about your experience earlier in this conversation about being white and being like, well, I can't tick multiracial because I have all these white privileges, right?
Mm-hmm.
I had a similar experience of like, if I don't struggle as much as who I've seen over here struggling, like I just can't claim that as my story. It just feels too self-indulgent or just too far-fetched, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it feels like I'm just grabbing attention or trying to get sympathy or something. So fast forward to this being in the school doing research for my PhD, and Scott being up there like in his rock star clothes and just like the coolest dude and like proudly saying he's autistic. And after, like at the end of the day, as I was wrapping up, I was like, I couldn't get my words out. And I was just like, you said you're autistic. Like I could not get my words out. I wanted to just tell him like, how, why, tell me more. And he goes, Joey, I think you're autistic too. Like people on the spectrum, like, you know how there's a gaydar? There's like a spectrum radar. And then he said, this was what changed my life. He's like, people who think as brilliantly, creatively, and out of the box as you typically aren't neurotypical. Like there's a way of thinking almost
Mm-hmm.
magically that is just really characteristic of people on the spectrum. And I burst into tears because it was the first time in my 30, at that point, like 34 years that I'd ever heard someone talk about autism in a positive light as better than neurotypical.
How long ago was this?
3 years ago, not even
Right.
3 years ago. So this is fresh.
Right. Yeah.
And then I went home that day crying and called someone close to me and said, this happened to me. And this was their response. Like, oh, I will also say up to this point, I'd been on a search to like figure out what I was having symptoms of, like extreme anxiety, panic attacks, meltdowns, couldn't sleep at night. I would get what I called electric shocks. So I couldn't sleep at night. So I had a lot of like real physical symptoms I was trying to look for answers for anywhere but like
Tell me about
autism.
those electric shocks.
Yeah. So like if the room wasn't completely dark and if it wasn't completely quiet and if I hadn't unplugged from devices or using my brain, which was hard to do when I was working full time as a teacher, having 2 babies, and then completing a full-time PhD program. So it was really hard for me to ever unplug. So when I didn't know that I needed to like decompress and reduce stimulation before bed. And I was going to bed hyper stimulated and then falling asleep quickly out of sheer exhaustion because I was getting maybe like 5 hours of sleep a night and having like 16-hour days, falling asleep very quickly because of sheer exhaustion. But my parasympathetic nervous system wasn't relaxed. And so my husband would then like get up to use the restroom and I would feel like bombs going off in my body.
Wow.
And then I would be up all night. Like I would not be able to fall asleep. Heart palpitations, like I could only describe it as electric shocks. And I would go to the doctor and say like, what's going on? Like, do I have a tumor in my brain? Like what? Fix me. And my therapist, the EMDR therapist, I mentioned this to, and that's where she was like, Joey, like you're autistic. Like, let's get you some help. And I was like, nah. Miss me with that. Let's go down another path of exploration. So I was looking into like hypersensitivity. Like I was trying to self-diagnose with anything else. So when I called this person that was close to me this day after I heard, I had this epiphany moment with Scott, she was just like, can you just like get a diagnosis or not? Because like we're tired of hearing you like. Essentially, she did not believe that I was autistic, and she was tired of me looking for answers that like skimmed on the autism thing. And it reinforced all of the reasons why this diagnosis felt dangerous and felt unsafe and unproductive. And I can't go then into society and be a thought leader or an educator or a whatever in life, because this is just an absolute liability. Nobody wants to hear this story. Nobody wants to hear this diagnosis. Just can it, right? And so that's what I did.
Wow.
And I only pursued, I did that, but one of the things, thanks to Scott again, they talk about the power of self-diagnosis simply because there's so many medical barriers. It's very expensive to get a medical autism diagnosis as an adult. It's easier when you're a child through like school systems and things like that. But within the autism community, especially autism advocates who are advocating for them within the community themselves, they really promote self-diagnosis, which is like you can download a bunch of tests online, or you can go to community centers and ask for tests. And even if it's not signed off by an MD, they're pretty thorough and give you a good idea. And so I eventually came back maybe 6 months later to exploring some of those tests. And like, I would be like, every single one, it'd be like, highly suggest, or high indications of being on the autism spectrum disorder. And then it wasn't until I didn't pursue getting the medical diagnosis until I started my business, because I felt like I needed protection. I felt like I needed validation, because I knew that there's people in the public who are just going to have questions or something to say. And that if I am going to advocate for other people who are neurodivergent and offer services that allow them to also be leaders and business owners and founders and these amazing people in society that we actually need, I wanted to be able to say like, hey, I see you, I feel you, and like, I'm going to make this safe for you,
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Two things. Number one, the sleep thing is interesting because I've had the same.
Like,
yeah, they're like
bombs to...
and it's manifested in different ways throughout my life, but it's worst. Are you familiar with night terrors?
Yes, I looked into that a lot as possible.
Yeah, and so that was something that would happen, and like you say, it used to happen to me when I fell into. It was almost like a skip to sleep stage.
Yes.
So like I dropped in too quick.
Yes.
And then that's where like it kind of like throws you off.
Exactly.
And yeah, and I get them on occasion. But God, it was so, like they're so scary, and it's very difficult to verbalize. So here's how it feels to me. I'll be asleep, and because I've dropped into this deep sleep or whatever, it's like the bit where there's no REM, so that you're not dreaming, you're not aware of anything. It's like the unconscious sleep, isn't it? That deep sleep.
Exactly. Yeah.
So it's just like you're basically, it's like you're dead. Yeah. There's just nothing, right?
Yeah.
So you remember like, oh, I'm not enough. Then there's nothing.
Nothing.
You're living in dead space.
Exactly.
And then for me, what would happen was, in the blink of an eye, and I might get some imagery with it sometimes, but it was like the feeling was like so familiar to me. This feeling that I would get.
Yeah.
And it was like, but it was the most terrified I could ever feel in a split second. Sheer terror.
Did you ever experience suicidation in those experiences?
What does that mean?
Because it, like, thoughts of like, I just want to die. It would be better to die than to keep feeling this feeling.
Oh, no, okay. The opposite.
Like fighting for your life.
I don't want to die.
Okay.
I am dying.
Yes, that too.
Yeah,
I would get both.
So that's the feeling I would get. Like you say, in this split second, nothing, and then just the most
alarm bells.
Yeah, and it is that feels more terrifying than anything I've ever experienced in
Waking
waking
hours.
life. Yeah, yeah.
100%. Yeah.
And it was so bizarre. And when I was young, when I was in my 20s, I used to make these noises, like horrific, terrifying, blood-curdling noises, like screams.
Mm.
Like one time, like one of my girlfriends said to me, I was like, it was like a fucking dying pig, like this
Mm.
noise that came out of my mouth. And actually, weirdly enough, I was experiencing them quite a lot while I was traveling. And I got one of these apps that records your verbalizations while you're sleeping.
Mm-hmm.
So it
I've
has
heard
like
of
a
them.
noise gate, and then it opens up
Okay.
and records every time you make a
Yeah.
sound. And funnily enough, I started doing it when I was in Taiwan.
Ah, okay.
And because it used to be so embarrassing, because I'd be sleeping in like hostels and stuff, and people are like, anyone hear that guy
Why?
like screaming the house down last night? I'm like, yeah,
Yeah,
it was me.
yeah, yeah.
And like, I remember hearing these noises. I listened back to them. It didn't sound like me. It was like,
Yeah. Otherworldly.
who is that?
Yeah.
Like these noise, like,
Wow.
and even just like little like speaking noisy, like saying stuff. It was weird. But I guess maybe that's to do with like that. The body's like paralyzed, isn't it? So a lot of your muscles
Mm-hmm.
don't work the same.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
Where am I going with this? But yeah, but then sometimes it would like manifest itself in like really physical. So the split second feeling would also
Mm-hmm.
come with like, let's say like maybe I'm lying on my front and I'm sleeping, and it's like I'm on a roof, and the slates are all just falling off, and I'm falling
Yes.
through.
I felt that. Yeah,
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 but it's like really
yeah.
physical. And
Mm-hmm.
like this one particular time, I'm like physically trying to get off the roof because it's like falling through, and I'm on my front,
Mm.
and I literally launched myself backwards across the room, and like threw myself into like the radiator in the corner.
Yeah.
I just
Yeah, yeah,
woke
yeah.
up like, what the
Yeah.
fuck?
Yeah.
So did you
So
have
that
like
falling,
those?
yeah, I get that as well. The falling feeling for sure. And it's not from a dream. Like you don't have any images, right? You just feel
Yeah,
the
it's not a
fall. Yeah, yeah.
dream. It's
It's a
just like a,
huge drop.
yeah,
If anyone's ever been on like Tower of Terror in Disneyland where it just like goes up
yeah,
and then drops, that's what it feels like. And you wake up in that like G-force of like just your body being slammed down. But it's not a dream. Like, yeah, I'm glad you know the
yeah.
experience because
It's
a
a
lot of people around me,
feeling.
it's a physical, visceral feeling. And you wake up inside of that feeling and the only truth in your mind is that you're dying. You're
Yeah,
100%
yeah.
dying
It's
in that
just
moment.
death. It's just
It's
death.
death.
It feels very familiar. It's very strange. It feels
Yep.
extremely familiar,
Yep.
but like it's like an old friend, but like the devil. Oh, it's horrible. And
Yeah.
another time, I woke up. I was, and then I had the split second dream. So the split second dream was me like I was in like this box, and I'm trying to like get out. I'm like, you imagine like crabs in buckets. It was kind of like
Mm.
that. And I'm in the corner of this thing, and I'm like looking up, and then all of a sudden, hold on a minute. I'm like, what the fuck am I doing? And I'm
Mm.
like, it's pitch black. I can't see anything. I'm like, am I awake? And then I realized, because I was so good at doing blackout curtains and everything, but I managed to climb up on my bedside table
Ah.
furniture, and I'm in the corner of the room, stood up,
Ah.
reaching up. And then I
But that was
realized
as a dream? Like
it
you
was a
got
dream,
yourself
but
there
then it
and
turned into real life.
dude, that's where you were.
And
Ah,
then I'm
okay.
like, oh, like, hang on, this is a wall. I can't see
Ah.
anything. I'm like feeling, and I
Ah.
have to like find my way over to the light switch, but it's so disorientating and so
Super
strange.
disoriented. Yeah.
And then just
Yeah.
recently, chest pains is the one you were saying that.
Yeah, I've had chest pain. You feel like you're having a heart attack, or like there's
Yeah, yeah,
no way you can breathe again. Like your body forgot how to breathe, or it never knew how to breathe.
yeah. It's
And
like you're
you're
just
like,
like, it's like you're being
no, this is it.
revived. You kind of like,
Yeah.
you just stop breathing. You're, oh,
It would get
oh,
to the point where, like, to talk to your familiarity, where in my, like, there was almost like a third person version of the story as well. Like there's the version of you that's trapped in your body that has no control over what's happening. And then there's a little voice in your head that goes, here we go again. And that's the
yeah.
part where I would be like,
Oh my God.
that's where I'd be like,
Yeah.
I feel like I should just die so I don't experience this again, because it feels just as horrible every single time. And that, like, there's a lot of things where it's like, okay, you go to the dentist, it's bad, but like you get used to it, you start
Hmm.
going, you're like, it's gonna suck,
Hmm.
but I can manage, right? But something about those nighttime experiences, every single time, no matter how bad it gets, it's just as unbearable as the time before. And then it's almost worse because that other like little voice is going like, not again. Like
Yeah.
I would rather just die than to keep experiencing this in my life because it's so terrible.
I think actually, having said that, thank you for sharing it.
Mm.
I'll get fed up with the feeling. I'll get that
Mm-hmm.
fed up with it. Let's say it's the chest pains, because usually
Mm.
it'll start like, oh God, why am I getting chest pains? Am I going to die? Go
Mm.
back to sleep. Oh God, why am I getting chest pain? Oh, and then what would happen is I'll get fed up with it, and I go, well, just kill me then.
Yes, that's what I was asking
Yeah,
if that's
it's kind of like,
yes.
okay, if you're gonna do it,
That's the sentence.
yeah, just kill me.
Just like throw up your hands like
Yeah, that's the feeling.
that's
It's
the
just total
sentence.
surrender, and it's
Yeah.
like, because I know I'm not gonna go to the to I'm not gonna call 999 or 911, whatever it is.
Yeah, yeah,
I'm
yeah.
not gonna go to the emergency room. So just kill me. Like if you're gonna do it, so weird.
Yes. Yeah.
And
So I have a question then.
go on.
Would you experience the sleeplessness for the rest of the night after one of these episodes? Or could you
Um,
fall back asleep?
Depends how severe it was, but usually I can get back to sleep.
Okay.
Would yours be in like the first hour, by the way, I presume?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. It's always the first hour.
Yes. Yeah, and so then with mine, because I would experience like I started calling it the hangover, right? Whether it's like a panic attack, I don't know what to call it,
Hmm.
but I would get the hangover feeling, and I would feel like the residual buzzing in my body the
Yeah,
rest of the night
like
into the day.
yeah, yeah. It's horrible. Yeah, you would wake up the next day and like, yeah, this weird like, oh, that happened last night.
Mm-hmm.
That was
It felt
weird.
like a hangover, like
Yeah.
you like half ill almost, like you just didn't, you had this discomfort, and it would usually only subside when there was enough daytime stimulation
Hmm.
that your nervous system kind of like forgot about it, or like now I'm processing conversations and lights and movement and people and all of that other stuff, so it sort of overrides whatever you're experiencing in your nervous system. But I want to say, like, I don't experience those anymore, and that's a lot because of like learning the practices the rituals and practices that I do to like take care of myself. So um I don't experience them much anymore, but I also just leave a little doorway open to saying like, hey, I might have this come up again in my life, so I don't have that perfectionist mentality of like I've conquered the beast, and if it comes back,
Yeah.
then I've failed somehow. But have you made any progress with it, or is it still something that just like kind of shows up
Yeah.
whenever?
So it's much less intense. So two things on that. Was probably a million things actually, but um actually quitting drinking. So I used to drink. Quitting
Mm-hmm.
drinking was the best thing I did for my night terrors.
Me too.
Um
I quit
yeah,
drinking.
amazing. And also in general, yeah, that those things are less.
Mm-hmm.
I did experience a bit more recently, but it's probably my own
Mm.
fault. So um I take quite a lot of supplements because I'm big into my training and performance and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And one of these is Tonga Ali, it's called, which
Mm-hmm.
is a hormone to help with
Mm-hmm.
hormones. And
Mm-hmm.
I tried it once before, and I had the same thing, chest pains.
Mm-hmm.
And then I
Yes.
gave them to a friend, or well, my coach actually, And then I recently started again. I was like, oh, I wonder if I could try those, because I would like higher tea. Everyone wants higher tea
Yeah,
if you're a
yeah,
guy. Oh, well, even a woman. But yeah, and then basically, yeah, I had a terrible time. There's something about
yes.
the cortisol and what it does to
Yeah,
me.
yeah, yeah. Exactly.
But yeah, so I'm not able to take that one. But yeah, just recently it's been really good, and I've just allowing the normal light, even the light from outside, like the street lights, just allowing that to come in. And I've been actually focusing on. My house is really cold at the moment. I've got all the windows open, but I've got 3 blankets on the bed, and I've been sleeping beautifully just this week. Like there's something, and it's a bit like a weighted blanket, then, isn't it?
Yeah, the weighted blanket.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's like mimicking being like camping or something.
Yeah, and the cold air too. Yeah, oh, I get the
Yeah,
best sleep camping.
yeah.
Yeah.
Hello, ladies. You see why I'm single? Come to my house where it's like camping. Oh
Really
dear.
though, the best sleep camping, like something about
Yeah,
that cold, fresh air, and then just like being
yeah. Well, it's
confined in a
natural. That's how we
and
would
the
have
all
slept.
circadian rhythms.
Yeah. We both got a wrist tattoo. I wanted to know what yours said.
Mine says Shukrani. This was my first tattoo. It means thankful in Swahili, Arabic, which so after that experience being in Tanzania, and I was very much in the dark chapter of my life and going through a lot, and I just wanted to keep gratitude, which is something that I learned in Tanzania from the people I was with there, the students. And I was in a Maasai village and living like literally in a mud hut in a
Wow.
Maasai village, and just it was such a profound moment of just understanding like what we really need in life is so simple, and just to be grateful for what we have.
Wow. Yeah, that's a good one. Interesting. Mine says muerte, which is death in
Death
Spanish.
in
Yeah.
Spanish. Tell me about that.
Uh, it was during my trip. My last country, I was in Mexico. I was on a beach.
Mm.
I'd actually I'd been reading Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck by Mark Manson. Um, and it ends talking about kind of like, it's like, why, like, stop giving so many fucks, like we're all going to die, just
Yeah.
live life to the fullest kind of thing. But it was weird. It was kind of like the book, and then I had this like huge realization that all of like everything that I'd experienced up to that point had been like colored by this fear of death. Like my anxiety through my teens, like it was all like fear of dying. Night terrors like kind of coming into
Yeah.
this, and it was kind of like, and like the sunset was going down. It was just like everything just seemed to like make sense. It was like the first time in my life like I'd had like a real like wow, like total insight, and like we're all
Yeah.
gonna die, and
Yeah.
not only
So
is
you might as well
death,
live.
yeah, like not only is death inevitable, but it's actually
Yeah.
necessary for us to live a healthy life. We need it.
Yeah.
Being in
Absolutely.
Mexico, like the Day of the Dead, all that, they look at death very differently to how we do
Yeah.
in Western
Yes.
cultures. So it's
Yes.
about being like fearless, and just what if you were going to, how would you show up if you knew that your death was coming very soon, or whatever.
Yeah.
Interesting. I have a little prompt. I try and put on this screen, I try and put a prompt for the conversation.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's to reduce verbal tics, but my one today was, what if this was the last time? So my intention was, what if this was the last podcast I ever do? How could I show up, with just being me and not
Yeah.
being afraid.
Yeah. It's beautiful.
But I definitely need to take the reframe that you gave me earlier about pausing, and yeah. So
It's your superpower.
absolutely. where do you want to go with this? Do you want to wrap things up, or is there anything else you want to talk about?
You call the shots. I'm here with you.
Okay, so this is actually we were talking about this off air a little bit, and we were talking about oversharing.
Mm-hmm.
And I, at the time, like this was a few weeks ago now, and I suppose I do struggle with this a little bit.
Mm.
Like, you've obviously picked up from me, like I'm big on trying to be authentic. I don't hide
Yes.
anything.
Mm-hmm.
But I do have like this fear in me sometimes. Maybe when I'm not full of 3 cups of coffee, and maybe when I'm feeling a bit more tired and a little bit kind of like I need shelter,
Mm-hmm.
then I can go, oh, what am I doing? What am I doing sharing this
Mm.
story? What am I doing telling like the world about
Mm-hmm.
all my hang-ups and all, like what if I get a girlfriend and a wife, and then what if they'll look back on these
Mm.
conversations like, oh, that thing you said or whatever.
Mm.
So trying to be like protecting myself so I'm
Mm-hmm.
not oversharing,
Mm.
but I want to be authentic. I don't know, maybe
Mm-hmm.
it's just the trade-off, because when you don't have like a qualification like me, guess what? I become the product.
I feel you. Actually, I'm thinking of the last clip I posted from my podcast. It's just a highlight on my page. Charlotte talks about this storyteller's paradox so much, and she like did it so beautifully. So check it out. But um, everyone feels what you feel. Like vulnerability feels dangerous. Like I said again, like in our nervous system, like we can't sort out what if a danger is a predator coming to eat us, or we're just oversharing and someone's going to judge us. It feels the same inside of our nervous system, like life and death, right? um, so there is this paradox of like, if I share this, am I going to get judged and isolated and ostracized? And that fear is real, because I would say all of us have experienced that at some point. And so this is why like storytelling requires learning. It's an art form. It requires frameworks. And I think one of the most problematic things that I'm seeing, I'm very new to the business industry. I've been a public servant for 12 years, and in academia and in community work and activism. So coming into business, which is something I never thought I would do, because I was never money motivated or anything like that. But showing up here now, and I'm seeing like everywhere I turn, there's marketers telling people, you have to use your story to sell. Like storytelling is everywhere in marketing and sales, and it's all after a bottom line. And maybe people give you formulas for like how to hook your audience and how to take them through an experience so that they want to buy from you. But what I've seen from everything out there is that no one's thinking about the safety of the person telling the story, or the actual benefit of the audience, the impact of the audience. Very much like they're throwing impact out there like a buzzword, right? But who out there is actually creating frameworks of safety to say, if you are going to share your story, you're going to go through experiences with vulnerability. And vulnerability, especially if you have difference or trauma or triggers, or if you're just human and you haven't been taught how to like navigate that vulnerability, it can feel dangerous enough to where you never want to do it, or you just feel icky. And then it's almost like the people who do it in business without the frameworks, they just like numb themselves to, I keep seeing it all over Instagram, like got a vulnerability hangover, and then they just like make a joke of it or numb themselves to it. So I say all that to say, thank you for sharing about your fears of oversharing and vulnerability, your experience with vulnerability. I think it's universal. And I think that you never stop feeling vulnerable. Like I give a lot of gratitude to those feelings of vulnerability. I literally thank my nervous system, like, hey, thanks for trying to save my life. But I got this. And the reason I got this is because I did my preparation, or I can ground into my frameworks. I have a framework of sacred storytelling, again, that I've learned through indigenous paradigms and narrative research. So I know that I am not entitled, no one is entitled to my story, right? I get to choose which stories I tell, when is the right time, who is the right audience, what is the right message and purpose. And because I have that much choice over my stories, I can feel like really confident about how I'm telling my story, and I can navigate that vulnerability with a calm nervous system. That's just the goal. Is I might be feeling vulnerable, but I'm gonna be able to do it with a calm nervous system, so I'm not reliving trauma and triggers that are harmful to us.
Yeah, and I suppose, thank you. I suppose what I'm thinking as well is, like, have you heard of fear setting?
Fear
It
setting.
it's like it's kind of like a stoic practice. Tim Ferriss kind of popularized it fairly recently and did a TED talk about it. And it's about, like, you basically just like play out the worst case scenario. So it's like, well, what you're scared of. So it's really being intentional and just like asking why, you know. So what? Okay, so what's the worst thing that can happen there? Okay, and then what? And then what? And then what? And then what? And then usually there's absolutely nothing to be afraid of.
Okay, let's sit with that one. So I did a technique similar to that, and oftentimes with my students, you know, they, especially if they were super nervous to get on stage and perform in front of hundreds of people or whatever, if someone's starting to have a nervous breakdown, we would come to support them, and then they would get through the moment, and we would go, but did you die? And no, you're here, you didn't die, so your worst fear didn't come true, right? So I will say that there's some element of that which I find useful and I've practiced, but I will caution that technique without the flip side of the coin, is that there actually are a lot of fears that are really viable, like valid, right? I can share, I'll just share a one sentence story. I lost a job that was created for me after my PhD was literally created for me, and I was encouraged to share my autism diagnosis at a time where I wasn't ready to share it, but I did because I was mentored to say that, you know, it would come off like as a positive, and
Yeah.
I lost the job. So that there was
Wow.
material consequences. There's material consequences for me sharing a piece of my story in the wrong space at the wrong time to the wrong people. So I want to just validate that there are reasons. You know, there's many stories. I think, I'm sure maybe now you're reflecting that, like, I don't want you to minimize that there have been consequences where our fears played out and it was real and it was valid and it cost us money or time or health or relationships or whatever. And all of that is valid. And that's why, while we can minimize some of the fears, that comes into play after we've done the work to really like learn a paradigm that allows you to tell your stories safely and be really empowered in your choices and which messages you're giving. And just remember, no one is entitled to any information from us or any of our stories, and we can still be impactful without sharing every single bit all the time. And I know that like that feels like the contradiction to being authentic. Well, that seems so calculated and like highly designed. And I would say, but is it like, are you not experiencing an authentic version of me and my stories right now? These are just the ones that I feel safe telling you, right?
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And what it makes me think is, I probably need some like strategic reflection around what I'm willing to share,
Exactly.
and like just kind of like make some boundaries
Mm-hmm.
and have them sort of center of mind, you know, as I go into this like journey with the podcast. Because I think about, yeah, there definitely are. Extreme example would be something like, you know, if you're one of the biggest podcasters in the world, or if you start getting an audience, quite a lot of them, for example, don't share their, like Joe Rogan, for example, doesn't share anything about his private life.
Mm-hmm.
Never talks
Yeah.
about, like, he'll mention his wife, and kids,
Mm-hmm.
but very much keeps that private. And obviously, yeah, and it's a good idea, because of course there's always
Mm-hmm.
going to be bad actors out there and people who
Mm-hmm.
don't have your best interests at heart and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think it's deciding which bits of your private life you're going to keep private. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's yeah, definitely something I need to consider. But
I I think when you do, and when you feel super empowered and intentional in the choices of what you share, then it doesn't really matter what the audience's response is, right? So the other piece of the vulnerability is where we attach a lot of importance to the response that we get, right?
mm-hmm.
And I think that once we feel super grounded in, this is a story that I know there's value in it, it impacted me, it taught me a really powerful lesson. Or like in many of the conversations and the stories we've swapped right here, we were sharing stories that allowed each other to feel less alone in our experience, right? And maybe we haven't, maybe we've had some of those conversations with other people before, maybe not. So that's valuable, that building belonging together in our story sharing, that's valuable, or instructing or impacting or inspiring. Or if we're going to bring it back to the world of business and using stories, we are allowing our people to find us. As I'm sharing stories, if you resonate with this and feel like, man, I've been looking for someone with that perspective, with that knowledge forever, because I shared that, you can find me. But it doesn't mean that I have to share all my deepest, darkest secrets. I definitely don't have to share the things that are very raw, that I'm in the moment processing right now. It hasn't even become a story. I'm just in the moment of it. And
Mm-hmm.
it's far too raw to share with somebody that I don't trust or don't know or anything. We can create a practice of storytelling that is good for both us and the audience, and that still gives us the impact and opportunities that we desire for our stories.
Yeah. No, thank you for that. It's no, this has been such a nice conversation. I but I do think yeah, the best conversations are when when I've done all the prep and I've not asked most of the conversation, most of the questions.
Most of the questions.
That's always a good indicator of a good conversation. And also means if we have another one, then I don't need to do any prep. I'll just bring the previous notes.
For sure.
Okay, before we wrap things up, talk to me about like future plans. What have you got in the pipeline? What are your hopes and dreams for the future?
Hopes and dreams. To my time in Taiwan will conclude when we move back to my husband's homeland in Hawaii, and we will purchase land to build a farm. And on that farm, we will create a community center, a studio. It will be an expansion of the online business I'm building right now, where we are going to offer just education and courses to everybody to get like real skills into people's lives, and allow people to be more creative and to really help people who are creating their own businesses, like mission-driven businesses, service-based businesses, to show up in their communities and shift things for the better in the worlds that they exist in. So that's the big dream that's happening. For sure, I'll be living in Taiwan for at least another year. And so overcoming some of those challenges being here, I think it would be a lot easier for me to start a business if I was living in an English speaking place and I could do live events.
Mm-hmm.
But I am putting together a group coaching program that will start in August. And so I'm feeling good about it. Like for heart-led founders is what I'm saying. Anybody that really needs to systematize their storytelling, get time-saving systems, like get your core story done that you can put on your website that you can get into an interview and talk about, but also have like narrative, like story banks that anytime you want to create content or create messaging, you have it ready to go. And also just that safe space that we talked about where you can practice your public speaking skills and your narrative skills, get feedback. So just a nice cozy container in that form for my first run at group coaching online over here in Taiwan.
So cool. And where should people go to check out your stuff?
Yeah, everything's Dr. Joey Liu. So drjoeyliu.com. Instagram is at dr.joey.liu. So you can find me with my name. I think there's a couple other Dr. Joey Liu's that pop up. So if you see like a full Asian man, that's obviously not me.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was tricky. There's a lot, and a lot of them are based in Taiwan as well. So
wow.
You'll have to scroll a little bit to find me, I think.
Yeah, well, I like I said when we first got talking, you're my second Dr. Joey, so
yeah, I know.
We'll Dr. Joey Weber was first one on the podcast, and then I actually recorded with him again a few weeks ago. So yeah, he's amazing as well. So I feel very grateful to have two Dr. Joeys within my network. And yeah, thank you for this. I look forward to staying in touch.
For sure. Yeah.
And then following your journey, and yeah, I look forward to speaking to you again soon.
Thank you for this amazing conversation, the space that you held, and your willingness to go down those pathways with me, those courageous conversations. And I look forward to also following your journey and doing that pilgrimage to Ireland, maybe.
Yeah. Fuck yeah. All right.
Alrighty.
Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye.